The gunshot echoed across the canyon just as Penelope Riley stepped off the stagecoach, and she hit the dusty ground of Florissant, Colorado, before she even understood what was happening, crimson blooming across her shoulder like a terrible flower. It was June of 1878, and the high-altitude town nestled in the Rocky Mountains had seen its share of violence. But Lucas Trent had never felt his heart stop, quite like it did when he saw the schoolteacher collapse. He had been leaning against the post outside the saloon, watching the afternoon stage arrive with the same bored indifference he brought to most things these days. At 26 years old, Lucas had built a reputation as the most ruthless hired gun in 3 territories. Men crossed the street when they saw him coming. Women pulled their children close and hurried past. He had killed 17 men in fair fights, and probably twice that many in situations that were not quite so fair. His hands were steady, his aim was perfect, and his heart was supposedly made of stone. But when that bullet meant for Jack Sullivan, the gambling cheat who had been standing 10 feet to the left, struck the young woman instead, something inside Lucas shattered like glass. He was moving before he consciously decided to move, his long legs carrying him across the street in powerful strides. His spurs jangled with each step, the only sound in the suddenly silent town square. Everyone else seemed frozen, shocked into stillness by the accident. The shooter, a drunken ranch hand named Pete Morrison, who had finally decided to settle his grudge with Sullivan, stood on the second-floor balcony of the hotel with his rifle still smoking, his face gone white as he realized what he had done. Lucas dropped to his knees beside the fallen woman, his shadow falling across her pale face. She was conscious, her green eyes wide with shock and pain, one hand pressed uselessly against the wound in her shoulder. Blood seeped between her fingers, staining the sensible gray traveling dress she wore. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, with dark auburn hair that had come loose from its pins and now spread across the dirt like spilled wine. "Do not move," Lucas heard himself say, and his voice came out strange, almost gentle. His hands, those hands that had dealt death so efficiently for so many years, trembled as he reached for her. "You are going to be all right. I promise you are going to be all right." Penelope looked up at him, and even through her pain, she registered the fierce intensity in his gray eyes. She had heard about Lucas Trent even before she arrived in Florissant. The letters from the school board had warned her about the rougher elements in town, and his name had come up more than once. They said he was dangerous, unpredictable, completely without mercy. They said he had ice water in his veins and enjoyed killing the way other men enjoyed whiskey or cards. But the man kneeling beside her now, carefully moving her hand away from the wound to assess the damage, did not look like a monster. His jaw was tight with concern, and his touch was surprisingly careful as he pressed his bandana against her shoulder to slow the bleeding. "Someone get Doc Harrison!" Lucas barked over his shoulder. And there was such command in his voice that 3 men immediately started running toward the doctor's office at the end of Main Street. "And someone get that son of a bitch down from that balcony before I go up there and throw him off it." Sheriff Tom Wade appeared then, his deputy already heading into the hotel to arrest Morrison. Tom was one of the few men in town who was not afraid of Lucas, mainly because they had known each other since they were boys, back before Lucas had become what he was now. "Lucas, let me," Tom started. "Get back," Lucas said, not even looking at him. All his attention was fixed on the woman in his arms. He had shifted her slightly, cradling her against his chest while maintaining pressure on the wound. "She is losing too much blood." Penelope tried to speak, but her throat was dry. The pain in her shoulder was white-hot and getting worse, spreading through her body in waves. She could feel herself starting to shake, whether from shock or blood loss or simple terror, she could not say. "Hey, stay with me," Lucas said, and one of his blood-stained hands came up to cup her cheek, turning her face toward his. "Look at me. What is your name?" "Penelope," she managed to whisper. "Penelope Riley." "Penelope," he repeated, and the way he said it made it sound like a prayer. "That is a beautiful name. I am Lucas Trent, and I am not going to let anything happen to you. Do you understand me? You are going to be fine." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe the absolute certainty in his voice, the way he held her as if she were something precious and breakable. But the world was starting to go gray at the edges, and she was so cold despite the June sunshine. "I am scared," she admitted, the words barely audible. Something flickered across Lucas's face, some emotion she could not quite identify. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, leaving a small streak of blood. And when he spoke again, his voice was rough with feeling. "I know, but you are brave, Penelope Riley. I can see it in your eyes. You are going to get through this." Doc Harrison arrived then, a gruff man in his 50s who had been patching up the residents of Florissant for 20 years. He took one look at the situation and nodded approvingly at Lucas. "Good pressure, Trent. Let us get her to my office. Can you carry her?" "Yes," Lucas said immediately. He gathered Penelope into his arms as if she weighed nothing, standing with fluid grace despite his burden. She gasped as the movement jarred her shoulder, and he murmured an apology, adjusting his hold to support her more carefully. The walk to Doc Harrison's office felt both endless and instantaneous. Penelope drifted in and out of full consciousness, aware of Lucas's heartbeat under her ear, the strength of his arms around her, the worried set of his jaw every time she looked up at him. She heard him talking to her the whole way, a steady stream of words that she could not quite process, but that somehow kept her anchored to the world. Inside the doctor's office, Lucas laid her down on the examination table with infinite care. When he tried to step back, Penelope's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "Please do not leave," she said, and there was such naked fear in her eyes that Lucas felt something crack open inside his chest. "I am not going anywhere," he promised, and he pulled up a chair beside the table, taking her hand in both of his. "I am right here." Doc Harrison worked quickly, cutting away the sleeve of her dress to expose the wound. The bullet had gone clean through the fleshy part of her shoulder, missing the bone and major blood vessels. It was painful and bloody, but not immediately life-threatening if they could prevent infection. "You are lucky, Miss Riley," the doctor said as he cleaned the wound. "Another few inches to the right, and we would be having a very different conversation." Penelope whimpered as he probed the injury, and Lucas squeezed her hand tighter, his other hand coming up to smooth her hair back from her forehead. "Breathe," he told her softly. "Just breathe. Focus on me, not on what he is doing." She tried to do as he said, fixing her gaze on his face. Up close like this, she could see that he was actually quite handsome beneath the hard edges and the reputation. He had strong, angular features, dark brown hair that fell almost to his collar, and those extraordinary gray eyes that seemed to see straight through her. There was a scar along his jaw and another through his left eyebrow, marks of the violent life he led, but somehow they did not make him look frightening. They made him look real, human, complex. "Tell me about yourself," Lucas said, clearly trying to distract her. "What brings a schoolteacher all the way to Florissant?" "Adventure," Penelope said, then gave a weak laugh that turned into a gasp of pain. "I am rethinking that decision now." A smile tugged at the corner of Lucas's mouth, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his entire face, making him look younger, almost boyish. "I imagine you are. Where are you from originally?" "Boston," she said. "Born and raised. My father is a banker. My mother is, well, she is a force of nature, really. She was horrified when I answered the advertisement for a teacher out west. She thinks I have lost my mind." "Maybe you have," Lucas said, but his tone was teasing, gentle. "Boston to Colorado is quite a change." "I wanted something different," Penelope said, and despite her pain, there was passion in her voice. "I wanted to feel like my life mattered, like I was doing something important, teaching children in a frontier town, helping build something new that seemed important." Lucas looked at her with something that might have been respect. "That is brave. Most people stick with what is safe and familiar." "What about you?" Penelope asked, turning the question back on him. "What made you become?" She trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence without being offensive. "A killer?" Lucas supplied, his voice flat. The warmth that had been building between them suddenly chilled. "That is what you have heard, is it not? That I am a ruthless, cold-blooded killer." "I have heard things," Penelope admitted carefully. "But I do not see that man right now. The man holding my hand does not seem cold-blooded at all." Lucas stared at her, clearly surprised by her words. Before he could respond, Doc Harrison spoke up. "All right, Miss Riley, I need to stitch this up now. It is going to hurt. Lucas, hold her steady." What followed was the worst 10 minutes of Penelope's life. The pain of the needle and thread pulling through her torn flesh was indescribable, and she bit down on the leather strap Doc Harrison gave her to keep from screaming. Through it all, Lucas never let go of her hand, never looked away from her face. He talked to her the entire time, telling her stories about growing up in Colorado, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the first time he saw the Rocky Mountains covered in snow. His voice was calm and steady, an anchor in the storm of pain. When it was finally over, Penelope was shaking and exhausted, her face wet with tears. She had not realized she was crying. Doc Harrison wrapped her shoulder in clean bandages and gave her a dose of laudanum for the pain. "You will need to stay here for a few days so I can watch for infection," the doctor said, "and you will need someone to help you once you are released. That arm is going to be useless for several weeks." "I do not know anyone in town yet," Penelope said weakly, the reality of her situation beginning to sink in. She had arrived in Florissant with such hopes, such plans, and now everything was falling apart before it had even begun. "She will stay with me," Lucas said. Both Penelope and Doc Harrison turned to stare at him. "Lucas, I do not think—" the doctor started. "I have a house on the edge of town," Lucas interrupted. 3 bedrooms, a housekeeper who comes in twice a week. It is respectable enough, and I am not going to leave her to fend for herself after what happened." "You barely know me," Penelope protested, though the laudanum was starting to make everything feel fuzzy and distant. "You do not owe me anything." "Maybe not," Lucas said, and his gray eyes were intense as they met hers. "But I am making it my responsibility anyway. You came here to start a new life, and you got shot before you even made it off the stage. The least this town can do is help you recover." "The least you can do, you mean," Doc Harrison said shrewdly, and there was understanding in his eyes. He had seen something in Lucas's face, in the way he held Penelope's hand, that told him this was about more than simple guilt or obligation. Lucas did not argue. He just kept looking at Penelope, waiting for her answer. She knew she should refuse. Everything she had heard about Lucas Trent suggested that getting involved with him in any way was dangerous. But she was alone in a strange town, injured and vulnerable, and he was offering her help. More than that, there was something in the way he looked at her that made her feel safe, despite everything logic told her. "All right," she said finally. "Thank you." Relief washed over Lucas's face, so clear and unguarded that it startled her. Then the laudanum pulled her down into sleep, and the last thing she was aware of was his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. When Penelope woke, it was dark outside, and a lamp burned low on the table beside the bed. Her shoulder throbbed with a deep, persistent ache, but it was bearable. She turned her head carefully and saw Lucas sitting in the chair beside her, exactly where he had been hours earlier. He was awake, watching her with those intense gray eyes. "You should go home," she said, her voice scratchy. "Get some rest." "I am fine here," Lucas replied. "How is the pain?" "Manageable." She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it, gasping as the movement pulled at her stitches. Lucas was on his feet instantly, one hand on her good shoulder, the other supporting her back as he helped her settle against the pillows. "Easy. Do not push yourself." "I need water," Penelope said, and her throat was indeed desperately dry. Lucas poured her a glass from the pitcher on the side table and held it to her lips, letting her drink slowly. It was such a simple act of care, but it moved her in a way she could not quite explain. This man, this supposedly ruthless killer, was being so gentle with her. "Thank you," she said when she had drunk her fill, "for everything, for staying with me." "There is nowhere else I would rather be," Lucas said, and the simple honesty in his voice made her breath catch. They looked at each other in the lamplight, and Penelope felt something shift between them, some fundamental change that neither of them fully understood yet. She had known him for less than a day, most of which she had spent unconscious or in pain, but she felt connected to him in a way that defied logic. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked softly. "Everyone says you are hard and cruel, but you do not seem that way at all." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as if he were struggling with what to say. Finally, he reached out and took her hand again, his touch careful. "I have done terrible things, Penelope," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "Things I cannot take back, things I am not proud of. I have hurt people, killed people. Some of them deserved it, some of them probably did not. I stopped caring about most things a long time ago. I just existed, went through the motions, did what I was hired to do." He paused, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "But when I saw you fall today, when I saw you bleeding in that street, Something inside me just broke. For the first time in years, I felt something real. Terror, helplessness, desperation. And when you looked at me, when you asked me not to leave, I knew I could not walk away from you. I do not understand it myself. I just know that from the moment I picked you up off that street, everything changed. Penelope felt tears prick her eyes at the raw vulnerability in his words. She squeezed his hand as hard as she could with her limited strength. I am glad you were there. I am glad you stayed. So am I, Lucas said quietly. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, hands linked, until Penelope's eyelids grew heavy again, and she drifted back to sleep. Lucas stayed in his chair all night, watching over her, and for the first time in years, he felt like he had a purpose beyond survival. The next 3 days passed in a strange, dreamlike haze. Penelope remained at Doc Harrison's office, and Lucas barely left her side. He brought her meals, helped her drink water, read to her from the newspapers and books he borrowed from various places around town. When she felt well enough to talk, they talked for hours, sharing stories about their lives, their hopes, their fears. Penelope learned that Lucas had not always been a gunfighter. He had grown up on a ranch outside of Florissant, the youngest of 3 brothers. When he was 19, a gang of outlaws had raided his family's land, killing his father and oldest brother. Lucas had tracked them down and killed every single one of them. After that, his reputation had grown, and people started hiring him to solve their problems with violence. He had told himself it was justice, that he was protecting people the way he had not been able to protect his family. But over the years, the lines had blurred, and he had become exactly what those outlaws had been. A man who solved problems with a gun. Lucas learned that Penelope had always been the rebellious one in her proper Boston family. She had wanted to attend university, to travel, to do something meaningful with her life, beyond marrying well and hosting dinner parties. Teaching in the West had seemed like her chance at independence, at making a real difference. She was nervous about it, she admitted, but also excited. She had dreamed of this adventure for so long. You will still get your adventure, Lucas assured her. This is just a rough start. Once you heal up, you will have that schoolhouse full of children, and you will do all those important things you dreamed about. Will you still talk to me then? Penelope asked, and there was uncertainty in her eyes. Once I am recovered and living my normal life, will you still want to know me? Or will I just be another person in town who crosses the street when they see you coming? Lucas felt like he had been punched in the chest. The idea of going back to his old life, of watching Penelope from a distance and never speaking to her again, was physically painful. If you want me in your life, he said carefully, then I will be there. But I understand if you do not want to be associated with someone like me. It will not do your reputation any good, being friends with Lucas Trent. I do not care about that, Penelope said fiercely, sitting up, despite the protest from her shoulder. I do not care what people say. You have been nothing but good to me. You saved my life, and you have taken care of me when you did not have to. Anyone who judges me for being your friend is not worth my time. The hope that bloomed in Lucas's chest was almost painful in its intensity. Friends, he repeated, testing the word. Friends, Penelope confirmed. Then, with a small smile, she added, at least to start with. The implications of that last statement hung in the air between them, charged with possibility. Lucas leaned forward, his eyes searching her face. Penelope, he started, but the door opened and Doc Harrison came in, breaking the moment. Good news, Miss Riley, the doctor said cheerfully. The wound is healing well, no signs of infection. I think you are ready to leave tomorrow, as long as you promise to take it easy and come back if anything changes. That is wonderful, Penelope said, trying to match his enthusiasm, even though part of her was disappointed. These few days with Lucas had been precious, suspended outside the real world. Once she left the doctor's office, everything would change. True to his word, Lucas arrived the next morning to take Penelope to his house. He had brought a wagon with blankets and pillows to make the ride more comfortable, and he drove carefully, avoiding the worst of the ruts in the road. His house was on the northern edge of town, a sturdy log structure with a covered porch and a view of the mountains. It was bigger than Penelope had expected and clearly well maintained. My father built this house, Lucas said as he helped her down from the wagon, supporting most of her weight. After my mother died, he moved into something smaller and gave this to me. I think he hoped I would settle down, get married, fill it with children. His voice was bitter. That obviously did not happen. It is beautiful, Penelope said sincerely, looking around at the wildflowers blooming in the meadow nearby and the tall pines that surrounded the property. Peaceful. That is one word for it, Lucas said. Isolated is another, but I like the quiet. He showed her inside, carrying her bag with his free hand, while keeping his other arm around her waist to steady her. The interior was surprisingly homey, with comfortable furniture, a large stone fireplace, and windows that let in plenty of light. He had clearly prepared for her arrival. The largest bedroom had fresh linens on the bed and wildflowers in a vase on the dresser. This is your room, Lucas said. I am right down the hall if you need anything. And Mrs. Chen, my housekeeper, will be here this afternoon. She will help you with anything you need, anything that might be uncomfortable for me to help with. Penelope felt herself blush, understanding his meaning. Thank you for thinking of that. Of course. Lucas helped her sit on the edge of the bed, then crouched down in front of her, his eyes serious. I want you to feel safe here, Penelope. I want you to know that you can trust me. I would never. I know, she interrupted gently, reaching out to touch his cheek with her good hand. I do trust you, Lucas. I would not be here if I did not. He turned his face into her palm, his eyes closing briefly. When he opened them again, the raw emotion she saw there made her heart race. I should let you rest, he said, standing abruptly and stepping back. Call if you need anything. He left before she could respond, closing the door quietly behind him. Penelope sat on the bed, her hands still tingling where she had touched him, and wondered what she had gotten herself into. The days that followed established a routine that was both comfortable and charged with unspoken tension. Lucas was attentive, but careful to maintain proper boundaries. He made sure she had everything she needed, helped her when she struggled with tasks made difficult by her injured arm, and spent hours talking with her on the porch in the evenings. Mrs. Chen, a practical Chinese woman in her 50s who had immigrated to Colorado with her husband to work on the railroad, came daily to help Penelope dress, wash, and manage the personal tasks that Lucas could not appropriately assist with. That man is different with you, Mrs. Chen observed one afternoon as she helped Penelope button the back of her dress. I have worked for Mr. Trent for 2 years. He is always polite, always fair, but always distant, cold even. But with you, he is warm. He smiles. Does he? Penelope asked, pleased by this information. Oh, yes. He watches you when you are not looking, and his whole face changes. He is in love with you, I think. Penelope's heart skipped. It is too soon for that. We barely know each other. Mrs. Chen made a dismissive sound. Love does not care about time. My husband knew he would marry me 5 minutes after we met. Sometimes the heart just knows. Did her heart know? Penelope wondered about that as she made her way slowly to the kitchen where Lucas was preparing lunch. She was growing stronger every day, the pain in her shoulder fading to a dull ache. Soon she would be well enough to move into the boarding house in town and start preparing for the school term that would begin in September. The thought should have excited her, but instead it filled her with a vague sadness. She had grown used to this life with Lucas, to their quiet meals and long conversations. She did not want it to end. Lucas looked up when she entered, and his face did exactly what Mrs. Chen had described. It softened, warmed, came alive in a way she suspected it did not for anyone else. How are you feeling? He asked, as he did several times every day. Much better, she said honestly. I think I could probably start going into town soon, meeting people, seeing the schoolhouse. Something flickered in Lucas's eyes. Disappointment? Fear? But he nodded. That is good. That is what you came here for, after all. Lucas, Penelope said, moving closer to him, what is going to happen when I am fully healed, when I move into town and start teaching? He did not answer immediately, focusing intently on slicing bread. You will do all the things you plan to do. You will teach, make friends, build the life you wanted. And you, she pressed, what will you do? The same things I have always done, I suppose. His voice was flat, carefully neutral. So we will just go back to being strangers? You will go back to being the ruthless gunfighter, and I will be the prim schoolteacher, and we will pretend these weeks never happened. Lucas's hand stilled on the knife. What do you want me to say, Penelope? I want you to tell me the truth, she said, frustration and fear making her bold. I want you to tell me what you feel, what you want. Because I have been living in your house, learning your heart, falling in. She stopped, shocked by what she had almost admitted. Lucas turned to face her fully, and his eyes were blazing. Falling in what? Say it. Falling in love with you, Penelope whispered, and as soon as the words were out, she knew they were true. Impossible, illogical, too fast, but absolutely true. I am falling in love with you, Lucas Trent, and I do not know what to do about it. In 2 strides he was in front of her, his hands cupping her face with infinite gentleness. You do not know what to do about it? Penelope, I have been in love with you since I picked you up off that street. I have been trying so hard to be respectful, to give you space, to not take advantage of the situation. But every day it gets harder to keep my distance. Every time you smile at me, every time you touch my hand, I want to... What? She breathed, her good hand coming up to grip his wrist. What do you want? Everything, he said roughly. I want everything with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to come home to you every night. I want to protect you and care for you and spend the rest of my life making you happy. But I am not good enough for you, Penelope. You are educated, refined, from a good family. I am a killer with blood on my hands, and nothing to offer you but a dark past and an uncertain future. You are wrong, Penelope said fiercely. You are so wrong, Lucas. You are good and kind and honorable. You think I care about your past. We all have things we regret. You think I care about your reputation? I have seen who you really are. You have shown me every day since we met, and what you have to offer me is exactly what I want. A good man who cares about me, who sees me, who makes me feel more alive than I have ever felt before. Penelope, he breathed, and then he was kissing her. It was gentle at first, careful of her injury, just a soft press of his lips against hers. But then she made a small sound in the back of her throat and pressed closer, and the kiss deepened. His arms came around her, one hand sliding into her hair, while the other supported her back, mindful of her shoulder. She had been kissed before, chased pecks from suitors in Boston, who had been more interested in her father's money than in her, but nothing had prepared her for this. This was heat and passion and tenderness all mixed together, a claiming and a surrender all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said, the words simple and profound. I did not think I was capable of feeling this way, but you changed everything. When I saw you bleeding, something inside me that I thought was dead just came back to life. You make me want to be better, to be worthy of you. You already are, Penelope insisted. You already are worthy, Lucas. You just need to believe it yourself. They stood there in the kitchen, wrapped in each other's arms, and the future that had seemed so uncertain suddenly felt full of possibility. That evening, they sat together on the porch as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Penelope was tucked against Lucas's side, his arm around her shoulders, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. I need to tell you something, Lucas said, and there was tension in his voice that made Penelope look up at him with concern. If we are going to do this, if we are going to be together, you need to know everything about me. I do not want there to be secrets between us. All right, Penelope said carefully. Lucas took a deep breath. I told you about my father and brother being killed. What I did not tell you is that after I tracked down the men who did it, I did not just kill them. I made them suffer. I wanted them to feel a fraction of the pain they had caused my family. And I did not feel guilty about it. Not then, not for years afterward. He paused, his jaw tight. There have been other times when I crossed lines, did things that cannot be justified, no matter how I try to rationalize them. I have taken money to intimidate people, to hurt people who probably did not deserve it. I became the kind of man I would have hated when I was younger. Penelope was quiet for a moment, processing this. She would not pretend his past did not matter, that the things he had done were not serious. But she also knew that people were more than their worst moments. Do you want to keep living that way? She asked finally. No, Lucas said immediately. God, no. I hate what I have become. I have hated it for a while now, but I did not know how to change. I thought it was too late for me, that I had gone too far down that path. But you make me think maybe it is not too late. Maybe I can still become someone better. Then that is what matters, Penelope said firmly. Your past is your past, Lucas. You cannot change it, but you can choose what comes next. And if you choose to be better, to do better, then I will be beside you every step of the way." Lucas pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair. "I do not deserve you." "Well, you have me anyway," she said, smiling against his chest. "So, you are just going to have to deal with it." He laughed, a real genuine laugh that she felt rumble through his body, and she thought it might be the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. Over the next few weeks, Penelope's shoulder healed steadily, and her relationship with Lucas deepened. They were careful about propriety. Mrs. Chen was always present during the day, and Lucas was scrupulous about not compromising Penelope's reputation. But they were clearly courting, and the whole town knew it. The reaction was mixed. Some people were scandalized that the new schoolteacher was romantically involved with Lucas Trent. Others were cautiously optimistic, noting that Lucas seemed different lately, less hard-edged and dangerous. He had not taken any jobs since Penelope arrived, had not been involved in any fights or shootings. He spent his days helping her, walking with her through town, introducing her to the merchants and families whose children she would soon be teaching. Sheriff Tom Wade was perhaps the most surprised by the change in his old friend. "I never thought I would see the day," Tom said one afternoon when he stopped by the house to check on Penelope. "Lucas Trent, domesticated and in love." "I am sitting right here," Lucas said dryly from his chair on the porch. "I know. That is what makes it so entertaining." Tom grinned, but then his expression grew serious. "Truly though, Lucas, I am happy for you. You have been heading down a dark road for a long time. Maybe Miss Riley here can help you find your way back." "Maybe," Lucas agreed, reaching over to take Penelope's hand. "She certainly makes me want to try." One person who was not happy about the situation was Jack Sullivan, the gambling cheat who had been the original target of the bullet that hit Penelope. He was a weaselly man in his 40s with slicked back hair and a perpetual sneer. He had been lying low since the shooting, but he cornered Lucas in the saloon one evening in the late July. "Heard you have been playing house with the schoolteacher," Sullivan said, loud enough that the whole room could hear. "That is sweet, Trent. Really touching. But we all know what you are. You think putting on a nice guy act is going to change the fact that you are a killer? You think she would want anything to do with you if she really knew what you were capable of?" Lucas's hand flexed toward his gun, old instincts kicking in. The entire saloon went silent, everyone watching to see what would happen. The old Lucas would have drawn on Sullivan for less provocation than this. But he thought of Penelope, of the man he was trying to become, and he forced himself to relax. "You are drunk, Sullivan," he said evenly. "Go home and sleep it off." "I am not drunk," Sullivan spat. "I am just saying what everyone is thinking. She is a nice girl from a good family, and you are trash. This is all going to end badly, and we all know it." Lucas stood slowly, his gray eyes cold. "Listen to me very carefully. I do not care what you think about me. You can say whatever you want about my past, about what I have done. But if you say one more word about Penelope, if you even think about disrespecting her, I will make you regret it, and I will not need a gun to do it. Do we understand each other?" There must have been something in his voice, some hint of the dangerous man he had been, because Sullivan paled and took a step back. "I did not mean anything by it." "Yes, you did, but you are not going to repeat it." Lucas tossed some coins on the bar to pay for his drink and walked out, ignoring the stares that followed him. When he got home, Penelope was in the kitchen making tea. She took one look at his face and asked, "What happened?" He told her about the encounter with Sullivan, expecting her to be upset, but instead, she just smiled. "You walked away," she said, sounding proud. "The old Lucas would have shot him, but you walked away." "I wanted to shoot him," Lucas admitted, "especially when he talked about you. But you did not. That is what matters." She crossed to him and wrapped her good arm around his waist, resting her head on his chest. "You are changing, Lucas. Can you feel it?" He held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I can. It scares me sometimes." "Why?" "Because I am not sure I know who I am if I am not that man anymore. Being dangerous, being someone people feared, that was my identity for so long. Without it, I do not know what is left." Penelope pulled back enough to look up at him. "What is left is the real you, the man who reads to me every evening, the man who brings me wildflowers just because he knows they make me smile, the man who spent 3 days at my bedside making sure I was all right. That is who you are, Lucas. That is who you have always been underneath everything else." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, trying to pour all his feelings into it because words seemed inadequate. When they broke apart, he said, "Marry me." Penelope's eyes widened. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, suddenly certain. "I know it has not been that long, and I know I am not what you imagined when you thought about your future. But I love you, Penelope. I want to spend my life with you. I want to be the man you see when you look at me. So, marry me. Please." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes, yes, of course I will marry you." Lucas let out a breath he had not realized he was holding, and pulled her close again, careful of her shoulder, which was nearly healed now. "You are sure? You are absolutely certain? Because once you say yes, I am never letting you go." "I am sure," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life." They were married 3 weeks later, in the small church at the center of Florissant. It was a modest ceremony, attended by the people who had come to care about them. Doc Harrison was there, and Mrs. Chen and Sheriff Tom Wade stood up as Lucas's best man. Several of the families whose children Penelope would be teaching came as well, showing their support despite any reservations they might have had about the match. Penelope wore a simple cream-colored dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her alter to accommodate her still-healing shoulder. Lucas wore his best suit, and he could not take his eyes off his bride as she walked down the aisle toward him. When she reached his side and took his hand, he felt like the luckiest man alive. The pastor, an elderly man named Reverend Matthews, who had known Lucas since he was a boy, smiled at them both. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. It is not a commitment to be entered into lightly, but I can see that both Lucas and Penelope understand the seriousness of what they are about to undertake." He paused, looking directly at Lucas. "Marriage is about transformation. It is about becoming better people together than we could be apart. I have known this young man his entire life, and I have watched him struggle and suffer and lose his way. But I have also seen the change in him these past weeks, the light that has returned to his eyes. Miss Riley, you have given him something precious, hope for a better future. And Lucas, you have given her something equally valuable, your whole heart, without reservation or protection. That is the foundation of a strong marriage." The ceremony proceeded with the traditional vows, and when Lucas said, "I do," his voice was strong and certain. Penelope's voice trembled slightly with emotion when she spoke her vows, but her eyes never left his. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, and told Lucas he could kiss his bride, the kiss was tender and sweet, a promise of all the days to come. The reception was held in the town hall, with food and music and dancing. Penelope could not dance much because of her shoulder, but Lucas held her close for one slow waltz, and it was perfect. People came up throughout the evening to offer congratulations and best wishes, and Penelope was touched by how many of them seemed genuinely happy for them. When the celebration finally wound down, Lucas took Penelope home to the house that was now officially theirs together. He carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the bedroom that they would now share. "Are you nervous?" he asked softly, brushing a strand of hair back from her face. "A little," she admitted. "Are you?" "Terrified," he said with a slight smile. "I want this to be perfect for you, and I am worried I will do something wrong." Penelope reached up to touch his cheek. "It will be perfect because it is us, because we love each other. That is all that matters." He kissed her again, and this time there was no need to hold back, no need to maintain proper distance. She was his wife, and he was her husband, and the connection between them was physical as well as emotional. He was gentle and patient, mindful of her healing shoulder, and when they finally came together as man and wife, it felt like the most natural and right thing in the world. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Penelope felt completely at peace. "I love you, Mrs. Trent," Lucas murmured against her hair. She smiled, loving the sound of her new name. "I love you too, Mr. Trent." The summer faded into autumn, and life settled into a new rhythm. Penelope began teaching at the schoolhouse in September, just as planned. She had 12 students ranging from ages 6 to 14, and she threw herself into her work with passion and dedication. The children loved her. She was patient and creative, making lessons engaging and fun. The parents appreciated her too, impressed by her education and her genuine care for their children. Lucas, meanwhile, was figuring out what to do with himself now that he was no longer a hired gun. He still had his reputation, and occasionally someone would approach him looking to hire him for a job. But he always refused. Instead, he started working on rebuilding the ranch that had been his family's. It had sat mostly abandoned since his father's death, but the land was good, and Lucas had always loved working with horses. He bought a few mares and a stallion and began breeding horses to sell. It was honest work, hard work, and it felt good to build something instead of destroy. In the evenings, Lucas and Penelope would sit on their porch and talk about their days, about their plans, about their dreams for the future. Sometimes they would read together, Penelope curled against his side while he held the book. Other times, they would just sit in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains. Their first Christmas together was magical. They decorated the house with pine boughs and candles, and Lucas surprised Penelope with a beautiful cameo brooch that had belonged to his mother. She gave him a leather-bound journal, encouraging him to write down his thoughts and feelings, to process everything he had been through. They attended the Christmas Eve service at the church, and Penelope was moved to tears during the candlelight singing, overwhelmed by how much her life had changed in the 6 months since she had arrived in Florissant. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked as they walked home through the snow, his arm around her shoulders. "How grateful I am," she said. "6 months ago, I was shot and bleeding in the street, terrified and alone. And now, I am married to the man I love, doing work that matters, living in this beautiful place. It feels like a dream sometimes." "It is real," Lucas assured her. "This is our life, Penelope. Our real, beautiful, messy, complicated life." "I would not change a single thing," she said firmly. "Not even getting shot?" he asked with a slight smile. She considered that. "Well, maybe that. But if I had not been shot, you might never have spoken to me. You might have let me pass right by. Just another stranger in town. I like to think I would have noticed you eventually," Lucas said. "You are pretty hard to miss. But would you have talked to me? Would you have let yourself care?" He was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Probably not," he admitted. "I had built such high walls around myself. It took seeing you hurt, seeing you vulnerable, to break through all that. So, in a strange way, I am grateful for that moment too. Not for your pain, never for that, but for the opportunity it gave us to find each other." They stopped in the middle of the snowy street and kissed, the snowflakes falling around them like a blessing. As winter turned to spring, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected it for a few weeks, the signs subtle but unmistakable, but she waited until she was certain before telling Lucas. She chose a quiet evening in April, after they had finished dinner and were sitting by the fire. "I have something to tell you," she said, and there must have been something in her voice because Lucas immediately set down the book he had been reading and gave her his full attention. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am more than all right," she said, smiling. "Lucas, we are going to have a baby." For a moment, he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his eyes filled with tears, something she had never seen before, and he pulled her into his arms. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. They had not really discussed children yet, had not talked about when they might want to start a family. "Happy?" Lucas pulled back to look at her, cupping her face in his hands. "Penelope, I am overwhelmed, terrified, completely unprepared, and happier than I have ever been in my entire life." He kissed her gently, then rested his hand on her still flat stomach. "A baby. Our baby." Over the months that followed, Lucas was attentive to the point of being almost comical. He fussed over Penelope constantly, worried about her health, insisted she rest more than she wanted to. She finally had to sit him down and explain that pregnancy was not an illness, that she was perfectly capable of continuing to teach and manage the household, but she was touched by his concern, by the way he so clearly wanted to protect and care for her. As her belly grew, Lucas would spend hours talking to the baby, telling stories, making promises about all the things they would do together. He read parenting books that he ordered from Denver, determined to be the best father possible. His own father had been loving but distant, more comfortable with ranch work than emotional connection, and Lucas was determined to do better. "What if I am not good at this?" he confessed one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her swollen stomach. "What if I do something wrong and hurt them?" "You will not," Penelope said confidently. "You are going to be an amazing father, Lucas. You are patient and kind and so full of love. Our child is going to be lucky to have you. I just want them to have a better life than I did," Lucas said quietly. "I want them to grow up safe and loved and happy, without all the violence and pain I experienced." "They will," Penelope promised. "We will make sure of it, together." Their son was born on a cold November night in 1879. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Lucas was genuinely terrified that he might lose Penelope. He paced the hallway outside their bedroom, while Doc Harrison and Mrs. Chen attended to his wife, flinching every time he heard her cry out in pain. Tom Wade had come to keep him company, sensing that Lucas needed the support, and the sheriff had to physically restrain his friend when the worst of the screaming started. "She is all right," Tom said firmly. "Doc Harrison knows what he is doing. She is all right." But Lucas did not truly believe it until he heard the baby cry, that first indignant wail that announced his arrival into the world. Doc Harrison opened the door, smiling tiredly. "Congratulations, Lucas. You have a healthy baby boy, and your wife is tired but fine." Lucas nearly fell over with relief. He rushed into the room and found Penelope propped up against the pillows, exhausted and tear-streaked but glowing with joy. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket, and when Lucas approached, she carefully pulled back the fabric to show him their son. He was perfect, tiny and red-faced and absolutely perfect. He had a shock of dark hair, and his eyes were squeezed shut against the lamplight. One little fist had escaped the blanket and waved in the air as if testing this strange new world. "Do you want to hold him?" Penelope asked softly. Lucas nodded, not trusting his voice, and carefully took the baby from her. The weight of his son in his arms was both terrifying and extraordinary. This tiny person, so fragile and helpless, was depending on him. It was the most important responsibility he had ever had, and he silently vowed that he would do everything in his power to be worthy of it. "Hello, little one," he whispered, and the baby's eyes opened, unfocused but seemingly looking right at him. "I am your father, and I promise I am going to take care of you, protect you, love you every single day of your life. You are safe with me. You are safe with us." Penelope watched them together, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This was her family, her husband and her son. 6 months ago, she had not even known Lucas existed, and now he was everything to her. "What should we name him?" she asked. They had discussed names during the pregnancy, but had not been able to agree on one they both loved. Now, looking at their son, Lucas knew exactly what felt right. "What about Samuel?" he suggested. "After your grandfather, you said he was the one who encouraged you to follow your dreams, to come west." Penelope's eyes filled with tears. Her grandfather had passed away 2 years earlier, but he had been one of her favorite people in the world. To honor him this way felt perfect. "Samuel," she repeated. "Samuel Trent. I love it." Over the next months, their lives revolved around the baby. Samuel was a good-natured child, quick to smile, and relatively easy to soothe. Lucas discovered that he loved being a father, loved the simple acts of caring for his son. He would wake in the night to help Penelope with feedings, would spend hours rocking Samuel and singing to him, would carry him around the ranch in a sling Mrs. Chen had made, showing him the horses and the mountains and everything that would be part of his world. Penelope returned to teaching in the spring, and Mrs. Chen helped care for Samuel during the day. It was hard to leave him, but Penelope loved her work, and Lucas was wonderful about taking over when she got home so she could have time with their son. The ranch was thriving now. Lucas had several mares with foals, and the horses he was breeding were gaining a reputation for being well-trained and temperament. People came from all over the region to buy from him, impressed by his skill and his patience with the animals. It was honest work that he could be proud of, and that meant everything to him. One afternoon in June, nearly 2 years after Penelope had first arrived in Florissant, they were sitting on the porch watching Samuel toddle around the yard, chasing after butterflies. He was 14 months old now, walking everywhere, getting into everything, full of energy and curiosity. "Can you believe how much has changed?" Penelope said, leaning against Lucas's shoulder. 2 years ago, I was bleeding in that street, and you were the ruthless gunfighter everyone feared. And now, look at us. Lucas wrapped his arm around her, his eyes on their son. I can barely remember that version of myself anymore. It feels like a different life, a different person. Do you miss it at all? She asked curiously. The excitement, the danger? Not even a little bit, Lucas said honestly. I have everything I need right here. You, Samuel, the ranch. This is all I want, Penelope. This quiet, ordinary, beautiful life with you. She turned to kiss him, soft and sweet. I love you so much. I love you too. You saved me, you know. When I saw you bleeding that day, something inside me woke up, and I have been a different man ever since, a better man. You saved yourself, Penelope corrected gently. I just gave you a reason to try. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Samuel discover a ladybug on a leaf and shriek with delight. Then Lucas said, I have been thinking, maybe we should write to your parents, invite them to come visit. Samuel should know his grandparents, and I would like to meet them. Penelope looked at him in surprise. She had written to her parents about her marriage and Samuel's birth, but the letters she received in return had been cool and polite rather than warm. They clearly disapproved of her choices, of Lucas, though they had never said so directly. Are you sure? She asked. They can be difficult, my mother especially. She will probably spend the entire visit making little comments about how I could have done better. I can handle it, Lucas said firmly. They are your family and Samuel's family, and maybe if they meet me, see our life, they will understand why you chose this. So Penelope wrote the letter, extending the invitation. To her surprise, her parents accepted. They arrived in August after a long journey from Boston. Her father, Richard Riley, was a tall, dignified man with graying hair and a reserved demeanor. Her mother, Margaret, was an elegant woman who made her disapproval clear from the moment she stepped off the stage, looking around at Florissant with barely concealed disdain. The first few days of the visit were tense. Margaret made comments about the house being rustic, the town being primitive, the people being rough. She questioned Penelope's decision to continue teaching, suggesting it was unseemly for a married woman with a child. She was coldly polite to Lucas, treating him like hired help rather than her son-in-law. Lucas bore it all with patience and grace, refusing to rise to the bait. He was unfailingly respectful, deferring to Richard and Margaret, making sure they were comfortable. But Penelope could see the hurt in his eyes when her mother made her cutting remarks, and it broke her heart. Things came to a head on the third evening of the visit. They were sitting down to dinner when Margaret said, Penelope, your father and I have been discussing it, and we think you should come home, back to Boston, where you belong. We can find you a proper situation, perhaps helping your father at the bank. Samuel can grow up with proper society, proper education. Penelope set down her fork carefully. Mother, I am home. This is my home. Lucas is my husband, and this is our life. We are not leaving. Do not be ridiculous, Margaret said dismissively. This was fine for a youthful adventure, but it is time to be sensible. You cannot possibly want to spend your life in this rough place with... She gestured vaguely at Lucas. With him? That is enough, Richard said quietly, surprising everyone. He had been mostly silent throughout the visit, letting his wife dominate the conversation, but now he looked at Margaret with quiet disapproval. Margaret, you need to stop. Richard, I am only trying to help our daughter see reason. No, you are trying to control her, the way you always have, and I have let you do it for too long. He turned to Penelope and Lucas. I owe you both an apology. I have been watching you these past few days, watching how you are together, and I am ashamed of how we have treated you. Richard, what are you talking about? Margaret demanded. I am talking about the fact that our daughter is clearly happy, Richard said firmly. Look at her, Margaret. Really look at her. Have you ever seen her this content, this fulfilled? And Lucas has been nothing but respectful and kind, despite the way you have been treating him. He is a good man who loves our daughter and is providing a good life for her and our grandson. That is all that should matter. Margaret opened her mouth to argue, but Richard held up a hand. I know his past. Penelope told me about it in her letters, but people can change, and clearly he has. He built a successful business. He is a devoted husband and father, and he makes our daughter happy. If you cannot accept that, then that is your problem, not theirs. There was a long silence. Then Margaret stood abruptly and left the table, going to the guest room and closing the door firmly behind her. Richard sighed, then looked at Lucas. I am sorry about my wife. She had very specific expectations for Penelope's life, and she has never handled it well when things did not go according to her plan. I understand, Lucas said quietly. I know I am not what you would have chosen for your daughter, but I love her, sir. I love her more than anything in this world, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to make her happy. I can see that, Richard said, and he smiled for the first time since arriving. And that is all a father can really ask for, that his daughter is loved and safe and happy. He reached across the table and offered his hand to Lucas. Welcome to the family, son. Lucas shook his hand, emotion tight in his throat. To have Penelope's father's approval, to be called son, it meant more than he could express. Margaret came around eventually, though she never became warm exactly. But by the end of their 2-week visit, she was at least polite to Lucas, and she clearly adored her grandson. When they left to return to Boston, she hugged Penelope tightly and whispered, If you are truly happy, then I suppose that is what matters. It was not exactly a ringing endorsement, but Penelope would take it. The years passed peacefully. In 1881, Penelope gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Clara. She had her mother's auburn hair and her father's gray eyes, and Lucas was completely besotted with her from the moment she was born. Samuel was a devoted big brother, helping care for his baby sister and protecting her fiercely. The ranch continued to prosper, and Lucas's reputation transformed from that of a dangerous gunfighter to that of a respected horseman and businessman. People in town who had once feared him now greeted him warmly on the street. Children would run up to him to pet whatever horse he had with him, and he was always patient and kind with them. Penelope's schoolhouse was thriving too. She had expanded the curriculum to include more advanced subjects for her older students, and several of them had gone on to attend universities or find good positions. She took enormous pride in her work, in the difference she was making in these children's lives. In 1883, they had their third child, another son they named Daniel. Their house was full of noise and laughter and love, everything Lucas had never dared to hope for when he was younger. Sometimes he would stand in the doorway and just watch his family, overwhelmed by gratitude for how his life had turned out. One evening in the summer of 1885, Lucas and Penelope sat on their porch after the children were asleep, enjoying the cool mountain air. Samuel was 7 now, Clara was 4, and Daniel was 2. The ranch had 50 horses, and they were considering expanding. Penelope had been made head of the school board, overseeing education for the entire region. Their lives were full and rich and exactly what they had built together. Do you ever think about that day? Penelope asked, her head resting on Lucas's shoulder. The day we met? All the time, Lucas admitted. I think about how easily things could have gone differently. If that bullet had been a few inches to the right, if I had not been standing in the right place at the right time, if I had let someone else help you instead of me. But you did not, Penelope said. You were there and you saved me. Not just my life, but all of it. You gave me this beautiful life I never could have imagined. We gave each other a new life, Lucas corrected. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You taught me how to live again, how to love, how to be the man I always should have been. I was so scared that day, Penelope confessed, lying there in the street, bleeding, not knowing if I was going to die. But then you were there, and somehow I knew I was going to be all right. You had this fierce look in your eyes, like you were going to will me to survive through sheer determination. Lucas smiled at the memory. That is exactly what I was doing. I looked at you, and I just knew I could not let you die. I did not understand it then, but I do now. I think my soul recognized yours in that moment. I think I knew, on some level, that you were going to change everything. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands, watching the stars come out over the mountains. Their children were asleep inside, safe and loved. Their home was warm and welcoming, their future stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. I am so glad I got on that stagecoach, Penelope said softly. I am so glad I came to Florissant. So am I, Lucas said, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing her knuckles. So am I. As the years continued to unfold, the Trent family became a cornerstone of the Florissant community. Lucas used his past experience to help Sheriff Wade occasionally, advising on security matters or helping track down outlaws. But he never picked up a gun in anger again. His reputation became that of a man who had changed, who had found redemption through love and family. Penelope expanded the school, eventually building a second room to accommodate more students and offering evening classes for adults who wanted to learn to read and write. She became a fierce advocate for education in the region, traveling to Denver to speak to legislators about funding for rural schools. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man who loved the ranch and the horses as much as his father did. Clara was bright and inquisitive, always reading, always asking questions. Daniel was the adventurous one, constantly getting into mischief and keeping his parents on their toes. In 1889, when Penelope was 33 and Lucas was 37, they welcomed their fourth and final child, a son they named Thomas after Sheriff Wade, who had become one of Lucas's closest friends. The older children doted on their baby brother, and the house was filled with even more chaos and joy. As Lucas approached 40, he sometimes found himself thinking about the man he used to be, the ruthless cowboy who had cared about nothing and no one, who had been so consumed by anger and pain that he had lost himself completely. That man seemed like a stranger now, someone he had read about in a story, rather than someone he had actually been. The turning point, of course, had been seeing Penelope bleeding in that street. In that single moment, everything had changed. The walls he had built around his heart had crumbled. The cold numbness that had protected him for so long had shattered. He had felt real emotion for the first time in years, and it had terrified him and transformed him all at once. He had become gentle in that single moment, and he had stayed that way. With Penelope, with his children, with his neighbors and friends, he had learned that true strength was not about how quickly you could draw a gun or how many men you could intimidate. True strength was about building a life, protecting the people you loved, being present and patient and kind, even when it was difficult. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1889, Lucas took Penelope back to the spot where they had first met, where she had fallen bleeding in the street. It was a warm summer evening, and the town square was quiet. "I never thanked you properly," Lucas said as they stood there together, hand in hand. "For what?" Penelope asked, confused. "For falling right there," he said, gesturing to the exact spot. "For being in the right place at the right time. For looking at me with those scared green eyes and asking me not to leave. For trusting me when you had no reason to. For giving me a chance to be someone better." Penelope turned to face him fully, reaching up to cup his cheek. "You do not need to thank me for that. You did the hard work, Lucas. You made the choice to change, to be better. I just loved you while you did it." Just loved me," he repeated with a soft laugh. "As if that is not everything. Your love saved me, Penelope. It gave me a reason to want to change, to want to be worthy of you." "You were always worthy," she said firmly. "You just needed to see it yourself." They kissed there in the street, in the same spot where their story had begun 10 years earlier. So much had happened since that day. So much pain and joy and growth and love. They had built a beautiful life together, one that neither of them could have imagined when they first met. As they walked home together, Lucas looked at the woman beside him and felt overwhelming gratitude. She had given him everything: love, family, purpose, redemption. She had seen past his rough exterior to the man he could become, and she had loved him through the transformation. And he had given her everything he had in return: his heart, his loyalty, his devotion. He had become the man she deserved, the husband and father he had always wanted to be. He had built a life with her that was worth living, worth protecting, worth cherishing. When they reached their house, they could hear their children through the open windows, laughing and arguing and playing. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. This was home. This was family. This was everything that mattered. Lucas pulled Penelope close one more time before they went inside, holding her in the gathering twilight. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you, and I am grateful for every single day we have together." "I love you too," she replied, smiling up at him. "Always and forever." They went inside together, stepping into the warm light and noise of their home, into the life they had built from a single moment of violence that had somehow led to something beautiful. The ruthless cowboy was gone, replaced by a man who knew how to love, how to live, how to be gentle and kind and strong all at once. And it had all begun when he saw her bleeding, when something inside him had broken open and let the light back in. That moment had saved them both, had given them each other, had started them on a journey that would last the rest of their lives. As Lucas settled into his favorite chair with Daniel on his lap and watched Penelope help Clara with her reading, while Samuel told them excitedly about something that had happened at the ranch that day, he knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of a good life. Samuel took over more and more of the ranch work as he got older, showing the same skill with horses that his father had. Clara became a teacher herself, working alongside her mother at the school. Daniel, true to his adventurous nature, eventually became a surveyor, mapping the expanding frontier. Thomas, the baby of the family, became a veterinarian, studying in Denver before returning to Florissant to care for the animals of the region. Lucas and Penelope grew old together, their hair turning gray, their faces lined with the marks of a life well lived. They became grandparents and then great-grandparents, their family expanding across the years. The ranch passed to Samuel, who ran it with the same care and integrity his father had shown. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1929, the entire family gathered for a celebration. Lucas was 77 now, Penelope 73. They were still sharp-minded and relatively healthy, though they moved more slowly than they once had. They sat together on the porch of their home, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and marveled at everything they had built. "Tell us the story again," one of the great-grandchildren demanded. "Tell us about how you met." Lucas and Penelope exchanged a smile. They had told this story hundreds of times over the years, but it never got old. "Well," Lucas began, his voice still strong despite his age. "It was June of 1878, and I was standing outside the saloon when the stagecoach arrived. I was watching, not really paying attention, when I heard a gunshot. And when I looked over, I saw the most beautiful woman I had ever seen falling to the ground." "And you saved her?" the child said, having heard this part before. "He did," Penelope confirmed, reaching over to take Lucas's hand. "I was so scared, lying there bleeding, not knowing what was going to happen. But then he was there, and he was so gentle, so caring. He promised me everything was going to be all right, and somehow I believed him." "Your great-grandfather was not always the gentle man you know," Lucas added, wanting the younger generation to understand the full story. "I had a hard past, did things I'm not proud of. But when I saw your great-grandmother hurt, something inside me changed. I became a different man in that moment, a better man." "Because you loved her," the child said wisely. "Because I loved her," Lucas agreed. "Love has a way of changing people, of making them want to be better than they are. Your great-grandmother's love saved me, gave me a reason to be the man I always should have been." They talked more about those early days, about the challenges they had faced, the joy they had found, the life they had built together. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and crimson, Lucas looked around at all these people who existed because he had made the choice to change, because Penelope had given him a chance. When the celebration finally ended and everyone had gone home or to bed, Lucas and Penelope sat alone on their porch, just as they had done countless times over the past 50 years. "It has been a good life," Penelope said softly. "The best life," Lucas agreed. "I cannot imagine what would have become of me if I had not been standing in that street the day you arrived. I probably would have ended up dead in some gunfight, unmourned and forgotten. But you gave me a reason to live, Penelope. You gave me everything." "We gave it to each other," she corrected gently, as she always did. "We built this life together, day by day, choice by choice. That is what marriage is." Lucas brought her hand to his lips and kissed it, a gesture he had repeated thousands of times over their 50 years together. "I would do it all again, every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would choose you every single time." "And I would choose you," Penelope said. "Always." They sat together in the darkness, holding hands, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful. The ruthless cowboy and the proper schoolteacher from Boston, brought together by a single moment of violence that had somehow led to a lifetime of love. Lucas Trent passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1931 at the age of 79. He was surrounded by his family, with Penelope holding his hand to the very end. The entire town of Florissant attended his funeral, paying respects to a man who had transformed himself and become a pillar of the community. Penelope lived another 3 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, tending the garden at the house she had shared with Lucas, and keeping his memory alive through the stories she told. When she passed away in 1934, at the age of 78, she was buried beside him in the Florissant Cemetery, under a tree they had planted together decades earlier. Their headstone was simple, bearing both their names and dates, but at the bottom was an inscription that told their whole story in just a few words. He saw her bleeding and became gentle. She saw his heart and loved him forever. The ranch continued under Samuel's care, and then his sons, and then his grandsons, remaining in the Trent family for generations. The school that Penelope had worked so hard to build and expand continued to educate children, a lasting legacy of her dedication. And the story of how Lucas and Penelope met, of how a ruthless cowboy had fallen apart when he saw her bleeding and become gentle in that single moment, was passed down through their family for generations, a reminder that people can change, that love can transform, and that sometimes the most beautiful lives begin in the most unexpected ways.